And Jay, I joked there about creating your own whiskey cellar, but I suppose the point of this is you maybe don't have to because you invest in whiskey that is elsewhere. Tell us a bit about how investing in whiskey works.
Yeah, so obviously, if you're investing in castle whiskey, distilleries are making new make whiskey, and there's a certain period of time before they can obviously turn a profit on that once it matures. So they opt to sell some percentage of what they make initially in casks to the likes of investors. So what Whiskey and Wealth Club does is we come in and we buy a large percentage of that to be able to then sell on to our clients, and yeah, it basically helps distilleries be able to cover the costs, their running costs, keep the lights on while they're waiting for whiskey to mature that they've already made that year.
So is this only Irish and Scotch whiskeys? I know the Japanese are very big into whiskey now. Personally, I'm a big fan of Kentucky bourbon. Are investors limited to those two countries?
No, I mean, right now, they're the two countries that we focus on at Whiskey and Wealth Club. Obviously, there's some other people working in the bourbon markets. Bourbon matures a lot quicker than the likes of Scotch or Irish whiskey. Japanese whiskey takes about the same period of time for the Irish and Scotch market. But yeah, of course, Japanese whiskey is, it's gotten a lot of press and media over the last 5 to 6 years. With them winning some awards. So it is a phenomenal whiskey. It's very well made. It's very high quality, much like Scotch and Irish. So, but the Scotch market specifically with that single malt market it's a very stable, very well established market. The Irish right behind it, and then Japanese is more of what we'd call an emerging market that we'll be looking to move into for our clients in the near future.
And how has the pandemic changed investor behaviour then, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, with investors, I mean, what we found as well through our report and just with dealing with investors is that the pandemic, much like, 2008 scared everybody, it's still not forgotten. The pandemic is now, remind them of what that was like. So I think that they're just looking for something a little bit more off the traditional financial markets that tend to become unstable and have volatility, whereas cask whiskey is a very stable market. It's really based on three things, being one, the age of the whiskey determines its value in the future, but more importantly than just the age is the brand associated with it and the amount of it that got released that year. So it's very, very different to the likes of, stocks, shares, currencies, bonds, that type of thing.
Well, and we have seen, Jay, that luxury items or things that are incredibly short in supply still demand top dollar in a recession. So what kind of price class are we talking about for a cask of really high-end sought-after whiskey?
Yeah, it's a great question. So whiskey tends to all start at around the same price. Some brands you will pay more for. When we buy from a distillery, a well-known distillery like Bunnahabhain, they might be selling casks or people selling casks of their new make for, 5 to 10,000, whereas we'll come in and buy a massive bulk and be able to put our margin on it and only sell for 3,000, for example. But over time, depending on the distillery, unknown mass-produced facilities that make, 10 million liters of whiskey a year, their casks don't sell for that much in the future. Whereas something like a Macallan or a Dalmore, that same age whiskey, where it's, say, for instance, it's a mass-produced facility, their cask, you might buy it for 2,000, but in 20 years might only be able to sell it for 15,000. Whereas if you had something like a Dalmore or the Macallan when it's 20 years old, you can get closer to 200,000 for it. Other brands like Lefroy's or Bunnahabhain's, who we deal with, brands like that might sell for 80 to 90,000. So it's very important to make sure you're not just buying a cask of whiskey that's from some mass-produced facility that make millions and millions of liters of whiskey a year. The ones that are making smaller production and then have brands that sit on shelves that people want to drink because they're familiar with that brand, that's where the value lies in.